Okay, we're going to do a little sound check. I think we're probably good. Can you hear me? No? Okay. I think it's pretty live now. Hi. Good evening. My name is Mary Cronin. I'm the director of the Cook Memorial Library in Tamworth, New Hampshire. And we're really glad you're all here in person and also online. We represent 16 libraries, 1 independent bookstore, and this is a partnership that began in 2006. And we love working together to celebrate reading and readers. For those of you who are here, please note the locations of the emergency exit. Make your phones not make noise. And for those of you online, please stay muted. I think you know all about that. So also, all of you should know that this evening's program is being recorded and that we'll have plenty of time for questions after Mr. Doron's talk. So this is our 15th One Book, One Valley program. And we've been planning this one for 2 years instead of 1 due to the pandemic. What's been good about having the extra year is that it's given us all time to dive in and binge read an entire series. And as a librarian, I can tell you that a lot of our readers' advisory work is helping readers find the next book in their favorite series and then suggesting another series when they're finished with that one. If you haven't seen it yet, you can see the favorite book series survey. It's on our website, like in Rancourt. The director of the Jackson Library organized and shared this with us all. So I'd like to acknowledge and thank the funders of this year's program, our public libraries, our Friends of the Library organizations, our independent bookstore partner, White Birch Books, Samuel O'Reilly House Bed and Breakfast in North Conway provided lodging for Paul and Kristen. And also this year's program has been helped immeasurably by the publicity shared by our local media on WMWV radio. Boy, I'm glad I don't need to say that on the air. The Conway Daily Sun and the Salmon Press newspapers, and by all of you who engage with our program on social media. Thank you. And I can't say enough about the crew here at the Majestic Theatre who helped us figure out how to hold an in-person and online event at the same time. It's amazing. What a wonderful job you've done here with the renovations and the continuing operations during a pandemic. So please take our online survey after tonight's program to help us plan next year's program. There's a handy QR code. If you take your phone, you take a picture of that, you go right to the survey. Ooh. And what else do you need to know? So that's also on our website, onebookonevalley.org. So if you haven't had a chance to play Mike Bowditch's Maine online trivia contest yet, we've decided to hold off on announcing a winner until more of you had had a chance to play. Find the link on our website, and thanks to Lycan again for organizing that contest. So now I'm pleased to introduce Paul Doiron. He and his wife, Kristen Lindquist, have been wonderful to work with, especially as plans kept changing with this pandemic. So Paul Doiron is author of the Mike Bowditch mystery novels, beginning in 2010 with The Poacher's Son. The 12th book in the series, Dead by Dawn, was published just this year. Paul is the former editor of Down East magazine and is a registered Maine guide. He now writes full-time, and his novels have repeatedly been nominated for literary awards and have been named top picks on national book lists, including Indie Next and Library Reads, which are dear to our hearts. Please join me in welcoming Paul Doiron.
Hello. Wait, am I on? Okay, you can hear me out there. Good. Yes, long in the planning, and here we are, finally. And it's such a pleasure to see you. It's really nice for me personally to be in this part of New Hampshire. I grew up in Scarborough, and we used to vacation in the Conway area, North Conway. We would stay at the Red Jacket Inn, which, had like an arcade room that was very special to me as a little boy. And then we would do Storyland and, the whole thing. So this is a little bit of a homecoming for me. And I appreciate the chance to be here and to be talking to you. I want to thank Mary for the kind introduction. I want to thank all of the sponsors for making this possible. The various libraries and Laura at White Birch Books. I will be signing books, by the way, at the end of the program. So if you have one that you've brought with you or would like to buy the whole series, I'm sure she would be happy to sell them. She has a wonderful collection out there. It's better than mine. So I thought, as I was planning this talk, it's a little bit different from what I usually do. I mean, once a year I publish a novel, and my publisher sends me out on a book tour in which I talk about that book. Now, inevitably, people want to talk about other books in the series, but this is a bit different because you have been reading, many of you at least, the whole 12 run thing, and so you've gotten a broader view of what I do than somebody who's just discovered me or has just read one book. Although I do know that some of you did just read Dead by Dawn, and you're very fortunate because it's my best book. So I say that with all humility. But I'm going to talk a little bit about where Mike Bowditch came from and how he and I have journeyed together over the past, I started writing The Poacher's Son, I'm pretty sure it was in the year 2000, and it took me 6 years to write. Now I write a book a year. Actually, it's less than a year, essentially, that I have to work on it, but but many things have changed in that time. If you had told me back in the year 2000 that I was going to spend essentially the rest of my life handcuffed to the Maine Warden Service, I don't know. I don't know what I would have thought. I've certainly learned more about that job than I can imagine. And very often I have friends in the Warden Service, and when I go to interview them with some questions, they will say, "Wait a minute, did we just get new guns?" And I said, "Yeah, you did." And they said, "Oh, we'll have to go check on that." So it's a really fun interaction that I have now, good relationship I have with the wardens. But it was a long time, in the making, because when I started The Poacher's Son, I did not know a single game warden. And I came to write the book because a couple of things that happened in my life. I'd always wanted to be a novelist. I grew, but my parents used to say, "That's wonderful, Paul, but what are you going to do with your life?" And that's a very good question to ask any young person who wants to be a novelist or an actor or a musician or whatever. I've been fortunate that I've actually been able to do this as my sole employment for the past 7 or 8 years now. But at the time, I was really, just a struggling, aspiring young writer, and I sort of didn't have much to say, as I often discuss, as a young man. But I realized that I did know about one thing, and that was the Maine outdoors. At the same time, I met my girlfriend, who is now my wife, Kristen Lindquist. And not only did she reintroduce me to the outdoors after I'd been in graduate school in Boston for a little bit, but she started giving me contemporary mysteries to read. I hadn't read mysteries since I was a teenager, and that was, Agatha Christie and Sherlock Holmes and Chandler and Hammett and some of those. And she said, "These are really much better than you think they are." And she was right. I just fell in love with contemporary mysteries and decided that that's what I wanted to write. I wanted to write books that people wanted to read, that you would want, gripping stories that made you want to turn the page. And so, where these two things intersected was in the job of a game warden. because I knew the outdoors and I wanted to write a mystery, and that seems to be where it all came together. So I started writing The Poacher's Son and had some ideas about what I wanted to do about that in lots of ways, the story, the character. But I was discovering a lot as I wrote that book about who Mike Bowditch was. When I finished it, though, I had a sense that two things were in my mind. The first was I tried to write The Poacher's Son so that if it was my one and only book, it was my one and only book, and it would just sort of stand on its own or not. On the other hand, what also happened was, the more research I did about game wardens, the more interesting they became to me. I realized that there were a lot of different potential stories that I might be able to tell. That came in handy later. I did what aspiring novelists do, which is went looking for a literary agent and happened to find a very good one at the outset, who, I followed all of her rules on her website about submitting first, the first chapter or first 3 chapters, and then she wanted more. And when she had read the whole book, she said to me, Paul, I have one question for you, which is this the beginning of a series? Because it's wonderful, it's a wonderful book, but I really only represent people who want to do this, as a livelihood. And if it's not the beginning of a series, then you're probably better off with another agent. And I said, well, fortunately, yes. Yes, it is the beginning of a series. Now, I had no idea what I was going to do with it. The only thing I knew was I had a character that I found interesting myself, but I was immediately faced with this predicament in this way, which is that if you've read The Poacher's Son, you know that Mike in that book, almost more than any of the other ones, is in bad shape. He is, he's a young man. He's the child of a very, a bad divorce. He's estranged from his father. He's a child of what we call the two Maines. He's self-sabotaging. He's headstrong. He makes some unwise decisions in several of the books. Most of the books. All of the books. And I said to myself, who in the world is going to want to read a series about this guy? How do I sustain this? And as happens to me when I'm writing or thinking about writing, the answer usually comes when I'm not thinking about writing. And I don't remember the specific instance, but I do remember the revelation, which was, most mystery series, you meet the protagonist in midlife or later life. They're already who they are, right? When you meet Philip Marlowe in The Big Sleep, he's already Philip Marlowe, and he doesn't change a whole heck of a lot in Chandler's Run. Maybe gets more alcoholic. But it occurred to me that I hadn't, in all of the reading I had been doing of contemporary mysteries, I hadn't encountered many that I could remember in which the protagonist started young and unformed and evolved and sort of grew into the hero that he or she was supposed to be. And I said, I've sort of lucked into this just by happenstance. I have this 24-year-old mess, and I can actually write a series about how he grows up to be, hopefully, a mature and admirable human being. And that can be what ties these individual mysteries together. Because when I was starting, every book was just about that book. As I got a little bit further along, the dynamic changed, and I think it changes for everybody who writes a series. Then it started to become about, well, how is Mike growing from book to book? I introduced certain characters, and I began to hear from readers who would get back to me and say, well, when are you bringing back Kathy Frost? Or the big one for me was, when are you bringing back Shadow, the wolf dog, who appears in my book Widowmaker, and was supposed to sort of come and go in that one book. And it was actually readers who got me thinking that there might be something that I could do with it. It took me a while, again, to figure out what that thing was, but it's a great representation of what it means to think about your work, not just as the individual book, but as something larger, in which, when I write a novel now, I'm not just thinking about, is it a good story? I'm thinking about, well, how does it fit into this larger story? I often privately describe what I'm doing as a saga rather than a series, because it's much more connected, I think, than lots of mystery series where, and I enjoy many of those series too, but where in the book I'm reading, the hero shoots 5 people and is himself shot, and then in the next book there's no mention of that. There was never any legal ramifications. There was no internal investigation, no healing from the bullet wound, or any of that sort of thing. And I'm thinking, well, that's not life. It's not even you can be realistic and entertaining at the same time, or semi-realistic at least, and entertaining at the same time. And that's really what I aim for with this book, with these books. It's very important to me that Mike feel three-dimensional, that he comes across as somebody that you might meet, in a variety store. He's getting a cup of coffee behind you. And, people have said to me, well, what would you say to him if you met him? And I said, I hope I never meet him, because he'd punch me in the nose, because I've treated him so poorly. The poor guy, everything I've put him through, and if you've read Dead by Dawn, that's the worst. He survives literally by the skin of his teeth. So I begin now, and I learned this a long time ago, actually, maybe 4 or 5 books into the series, because I was thinking, well, I have to have a gimmick. Maybe each book needs to have some sort of gimmick to it. And instead what happened was I just realized that wasn't going to work for me. That what needed to happen instead was I needed to stay focused on this character. So now when I'm writing a book, I start by saying to myself, where is Mike at the beginning of this book, personally and professionally? And I think to myself, well, where do I want him to be at the end of this book? So, and then I choose a mystery plot that will somehow bring out the conflict that he's dealing with, and not only sort of move a story along, but move his story along. So it's an interesting dynamic that way, because there's so many, when you write a novel to begin with, keeping it all in your head is a real challenge. Now, however, I am keeping 12 novels in my head at the same time. A good friend of mine, the novelist Julia Spencer Fleming, who writes about upstate New York, has a wonderful series. She said to me early on, she said, "Paul, have you started keeping a character Bible yet?" And I was like, "Character Bible? What does she mean by that?" And she said, "Yeah, it's like you write down like the color of the character's eyes, because the next time you mention them, you don't want them to go from having blue to brown, because again, there's so much stuff to keep straight." And I didn't think I needed that until the inconsistencies started popping up. Fortunately, I do have I have a great team at Macmillan. I specifically work with St. Martin's Press and their mystery imprint Minotaur books, and I've been there from the beginning. All of the books have been published with the same editor, the same agent, even the same publisher, even the same PR people. I can announce tonight, although I've heard it actually was announced this week in Publishers Weekly, that I just got a new contract for 3 more Mike Bowditch books after the next one. Thank you. And that obviously is a vote of confidence, because if you know anything about the publishing industry, series are not doing very well at the moment. So it feels good to have one that's thriving. It certainly makes me a little bit more relieved when I contemplate, the home repair bills and that kind of thing. When I was getting ready, when Kristen and I were getting ready to come over here today, I put it to her, when would you like to read my new book? Because she had not read it yet. The new book is titled Hatchet Island. It's due to come out on June 28th of next year, and nobody had read it. You can imagine how that makes me feel. But over time, I think I have a better sense about what works and what doesn't work. So it's about 3 hours from the mid-coast where Kristen and I live here. And she said, "I think I want you to print it out, and so I can read it in the car." Now, the thing you need to know about Kristen is she is, in addition to being my guiding light, I told her I was going to say that. She is the reader in the household. She can plow through a book in a day, and I'm always nervous when she starts reading something of mine, because I'm like, what if she hates it? I mean, she's the one person who really I have to trust will will approve of what I'm doing. So anyway, we're driving over here, and I have this policy when she's reading in my presence, which is, don't ask me anything about the book. Don't say anything about the book. Just read it. So for 3 hours, Kristen read ferociously. She did not look up, except when we came to a stop, and then she'd sort of blink and say, "Where are we?" And I would say, "Oh, we're in Auburn, we're in Naples, we're in Freiburg," and that struck me as a good thing, that she was so invested in this book. Which is not done. It's sort of beginning the editing process. It's not going to be what you'll end up reading next year. So anyway, we started talking about, well, what are you going to talk about tonight, Paul? And she said, because usually I like to read. I like to read something. Simply because, I write fiction, and I think it's useful when you write fiction for readers to be able to hear how I hear it in my head. My books are all available, I think as many of you know, as audiobooks. I have a wonderful narrator, but he doesn't narrate the books in the way that I would, So I always like to read something. And Kristen, to my shock, and also nervousness, said, you should read the first chapter of Hatchet Island to these people. They have waited a long time for something, and they deserve a treat. Now, whether this qualifies as a treat or not, I don't know. But you're going to get it. You are the first human beings on the planet to hear me read aloud from, even Kristen has not heard me read aloud from this. This is what the book looks like, by the way, when I'm working on it. They've already done the cover. This is one of the strange things about contemporary publishing, is that the various bookstores and distributors, and in some cases the libraries, need to know information about forthcoming books about a year in advance, which means that I have to come up with that stuff for them, in some cases when I've only just begun writing the book. And it's very unusual. It's not like spending 6 years on a book, submitting it, having everybody read it, having long discussions, with the art director, and they come up with the title and the design and the whole thing, which is how a lot of books get done. But when you write a book a year, like I do, there's no time. So Hatchet Island is a work in progress here, and so this is the unedited, unproofread. My editor and agent have not weighed in yet, and I have not told them. They may be tuning in today. If so, Anne, I apologize. No, you'll like it, I think. I hope. So I'm going to read chapter 1. Because I think one thing is that, especially if you've read Dead by Dawn, you will say to yourself, where in the world is he going to go after this? And it was that question that kept me up at night for about 4 months. And this is how I solved it, I hope. So when this is published, it probably won't even be the first chapter, but anyway. Chapter 1 of Hatchet Island. The sound of a gunshot will travel miles over open water, especially when the bay is as calm as it was that morning. What was that? Stacy said. She paused in her paddling and let one blade hang above the surface, trailing a reddish-brown tendril of rockweed. The length of her tanned neck shined with perspiration, although we'd only left East Booth Bay 20 minutes before. She had managed to stuff most of her hair under a faded Red Sox cap and had secured her ponytail through the adjustable fastener. There was gray in the brown now, just a few strands of spider silk, but enough to announce that she had no intention of coloring her hair to appear younger and didn't care to hear your opinion on the subject. Probably a lobsterman shooting a gull, I said. It's a little early for an execution, don't you think? An effervescent mist that was already burning off in the July heat was all that separated our kayaks. I had to dig in hard with my own paddle to prevent a rear-end collision. Our seagoing boats were 17 feet long and not made for tight turns. My momentum carried me forward. As I slid alongside her, Stacy took hold of the grab handle on my bow to keep us from drifting apart. I caught a whiff of coconut-scented sunscreen from her outstretched arm. The rising sun was a pale smudge behind her, like a yellow thumbprint left by a painter on a wet gray canvas. "Didn't you used to shoot gulls when you were an intern on Baker Island?" I asked. "Because that's where it sounds like the shot came from." Stacy couldn't help but bristle. "Yeah, but we had a dispensation from the feds to protect puffin chicks." It was the dirty secret of seabird management that in order to protect the most vulnerable species, the endangered puffins and roseate terns, biologists had no choice but to kill the predatory gulls that fed upon their eggs and young. Maine lobstermen believe their dispensation comes from a higher authority than the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Uh-oh. Chapter, where's my 2? I'm missing 2, Kristen. As if on cue, we slid past a blue and orange buoy. The float was attached by a ground line to a lobster trap, or possibly a string of traps, that was resting on the bottom 15 fathoms below. It was just the suction of the outgoing tide, but the buoy seemed to be straining to pursue us the way a leashed dog might follow you on a sidewalk. "It had to have been a lobsterman," said Stacy. "Why do you say that?" "Because Megan McCleary has a rule that the interns need to get their daily murder done before the first puffin watching boat arrives. It doesn't look good for tourists to get pictures of an unwashed biology student assassinating Jonathan Livingston Seagull." "Megan sounds like a character. That's one term for her." "I thought you enjoyed your summer working on the island." "One summer being bossed around by the great Dr. McCleary was enough." "She did bring back puffins to Baker Island." "She'll tell you she was just following Steve Kress's example. He was the visionary. She just took his work to the next level. No one does humility better than Megan." "It's still an accomplishment. Didn't you say Baker's the southernmost puffin island on the eastern seaboard? Restoring that seabird colony after it was wiped out is an awesome achievement." She made a noise that signaled grudging agreement. "Near Parsons Ledge, a sloop, running on its engine because there was no breeze, overtook us. A young family was on board. Stacy waved to a little girl, 4 or 5 years old, sitting beside her dad at the tiller, and she called back in a squeaky toy voice, 'We're going sailing!' 'You're going to have so much fun,' Stacy replied as the boat's wake sent us rocking. Our borrowed kayaks were seaworthy Old Town Lukshas. They were constructed of a slippery Kevlar and fiberglass composite and pointed at the prow and stern. We controlled our direction with foot pedals connected to a rear rudder. The boats had waterproof holds in the front and rear, bungee tie-downs to secure spare paddles, and 50-inch flagpoles mounted behind the seats to save us from being run over by a speeding lobsterman. The wind was forecast to rise later, turning onshore in the late afternoon, but so far the air remained breathless. Every stir of my paddle brought the fecund smell of the sea into my nose and mouth. It was as if I could taste the teeming life in the green depths, the phytoplankton and the zooplankton, the oyster beds, the shoals of mackerel, and the deep-diving harbor porpoises. The sensory stimulation left me feeling intoxicated. It wasn't just the sea air either. Despite all odds, I'd found myself back together with Stacy Stevens after more than 2 years apart, during which time we'd lived in different states and both had other partners. Our break had seemed irreparable, absolute, and had shattered the hopes of her parents, Charlie and Nora, who were mentors and friends to me. Now the wheel of time had come full circle, and somehow I was again courting the woman who had been my live-in girlfriend and almost my fiancée. From my perspective, our new-old relationship was simultaneously exciting, familiar, awkward, and terrifying. We had become different people during the hiatus, intimate strangers. A white bird with a black cap, red bill, and wings as sharp as knives flashed overhead. It hovered, then plunged headfirst into the bay, emerging with a silvery, squirming fish. "That's a roseate tern," said Stacy. "They nest out on Baker Island. Seeing one's a good omen." Her happiness was beautiful to behold. She'd been such a troubled soul once. I wanted so much to believe she'd changed, but I worried that my desire for her might be deluding me. Another gunshot echoed across the water. Trying to see through the mist was like peering through layers of gauze. The indistinct shape of a forested island loomed ahead into port. The big ball compass on my deck said we were headed south by southwest, which meant that vague mass of land was Ayers Island. Sounds do strange things at sea, but my meager powers of echolocation told me the shooting was coming from the distant seabird colony of Baker, 2 miles further. "It's too bad we don't know who that asshole lobsterman is," Stacy said, sticking to her original assumption. "Or we could cut his lines to rebalance the cosmic scales of justice." There are no cosmic scales of justice, not in my experience. Jeepers, Mike. I hope you're not going to get all dark and existentialist on me. "If I start brooding, feel free to splash me," I said. Polarized sunglasses hid her eyes, which were almond-shaped, jade green, and bewitching, but I could imagine the wicked humor in them. "Deal." And laughing, she pushed our boats apart. It might have been July, but the temperature of the water at the surface couldn't have been more than 50 degrees. The Gulf Stream bypasses the Maine coast, which is cooled instead by a current that flows down past Labrador. Stacy was wearing a ruby-red life vest over a sleeveless t-shirt and shorts. I'd opted for a full-bodied dry suit made of green and gray Gore-Tex under my black LL Bean PFD. I couldn't understand how she wasn't freezing. "What did Kendra say when you told her we were coming?" I asked. I didn't. Kendra Ballard had been Stacy's college roommate, and they had worked together on Baker. Now she was the project manager for the Maine Seabird Initiative. She collected the survey data for Megan McCleary, oversaw the project's 2 interns, and never left the island between May and August, after the birds migrated south. "Poor Ken might as well be Prometheus chained to the rock," Stacy had said the night before, "except she has terns eating at her heart instead of vultures." I'd met Kendra once briefly years ago before Stacy and I had begun to date. I hadn't made a good impression, a good first impression, or a good second impression, either. I worried, in fact, how I might be received today. The kayak wobbled when I sat up. "What do you mean you didn't tell her we were coming?" It didn't seem like a big deal. I steadied myself by pressing my hips into the seat. "How do you know she'll let us land? Uninvited visitors are prohibited from coming ashore in Baker." "Yeah, well, the island's under the management of the Maine Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, and you're a game warden, which gives you license to snoop around. You can pull out your badge if Kendra gives us a hard time." "I'm not going to pull out my badge," I said. "What about your gun?" I became conscious of the holstered firearm on my belt beneath the dry suit. "Not going to happen." "Then I'll just have to convince my girl Ken into bending the rules for us. I've always been able to talk her into bad decisions. Kendra once called me the little devil on her shoulder." "I thought you'd repented of your manipulative ways, Stevens." "I have, Bowditch," she said. "Most of them, anyway." Then she splashed me with her paddle. So that's for the first chapter. I couldn't send Mike into a freezing river again in the first chapter. And that was one of those things. If you read Dead by Dawn, you know it was both a departure from the previous books, but also in my mind, an extension long in the making, which was I wanted to have a novel in the series where Mike was on his own and had nobody to save him but himself. He's learned so much over the series. He's had allies and teachers, and the time had come, I thought, for him to face death by himself, essentially. Now, you could argue that he has the wolf with him, but he's also caring for the wolf. He's also trying to save the wolf. So, Dead by Dawn was a book that I set out to write, as suspensefully as I could. And when I was done with it, as I said a few minutes ago, I had this thought, well, now what? And I realized, well, I need to step back, and I need to sort of reset the game board a little bit, move some characters around, and Mike's getting physical therapy in this book, by the way. He's not a Superman by any means. In any case, I think I'm getting close to, I think I should have passed my little window that I wanted to start opening us up for questions. So I hope you have some for me. I know that there are microphones on either side if you're in the audience and would like to come up to them. And Mary also has questions from out in the ether.
No, this is not on either. Is this on? Yes,
Yep.
It is. Okay. Feel free to line up.
They're just fixing the mic.
That sounds like it's going. There you go.
I can go first.
Yeah, you go first. You're up and running.
Thank you for coming, first of all. I've read, I think, 8 now in your series. I'm not quite through it all yet, but my question is, do you ever see Mike leaving Maine, or is Maine part? I know, as I've heard some people say, sometimes place is a character in the book, and if he left Maine, it'd be like killing off a character. So it sounds like he's venturing offshore in this next book, which is pretty good, but do you ever see him leaving Maine?
I think he will leave in my book, One Last Lie. The book starts actually in Florida for several chapters.
Yeah.
He's down there on an assignment, which is something that the wardens really do. But no, I don't see moving him around. He's not going to join the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and bust smugglers who are trying to bring parrots in from South America. The point you made though about setting and the importance of setting as a character. When we used to actually have in-person mystery writing conferences, that was the panel I was always assigned to, setting as a character. And, I always tried to be smart about what I said. But actually, in the last couple of years, something else has occurred to me, which is no, setting is not a character. setting reveals character. It's the way that the person either is in sync with where they are or is at odds with where they are that shows their internal dynamics. So that's my theory, at least.
Well, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for reading that first chapter. That's really exciting. I wanted to ask about the next book, but I was wondering if you were willing to talk about your long-term relationship between Mike and Stacy. How is that going to go? Who's it going to end up with?
I can't give that away. If I do, you won't buy the future books. I will say a couple things. One is that if you've read the series or even much of the series, you know that Mike is not lucky in love, to say the least. And, the reason for that is, it's famous that, the idea of men having intimacy issues, right? But Mike, especially being the son of Jack Bowditch and Marie Turner, who had this very strange relationship even after they divorced, I think made him especially hesitant, to commit. But also too, when I introduced Stacy she sort of shows up for the first time in the third book, but I had this idea. I said, well, wouldn't it be interesting to bring in a character, a love interest, who's even more troubled than Mike is? What I didn't anticipate was that that approach was going to cause some readers, not all readers, to despise her, and they weren't seeing her the way that I saw her, and frankly, I feel like it was a bit of a failure on my part as a writer that I couldn't bring her to life the way that I wanted to, and so again, it was one of these things where I had to step back and look at the series long term. What do I want to do with her, with Mike, with Danny Tate, who was Mike's girlfriend for several of the books. But he will not remain a perpetual bachelor. I like Stacy much better. Yeah, it's like one of these things where there was a time where I was getting Team Stacy, Team Danny Facebook posts from readers. It was pretty funny. It's like, well, Mike doesn't have to commit, but I have to commit. Thank you.
Well, I have to ask this question for a friend who couldn't be here, whose maiden name was Kronk. And she has cousins named Billy and Emma.
Oh, my.
And some of them live in Maine. So she said, you have to ask.
Where did that come from, huh?
Where did it come from? Because Kronk is not a common name.
No, it's not. The last name of Kronk, I will freely admit, came from the legendary Maine trapper Oscar Kronk, who has a trapping supply store in Wiscasset, Maine. And I just liked how abrupt a name it is. And it was only later, actually, that somebody sort of said, oh, Kronk, like Gronk. And I hadn't put that together, and I'm a big Patriots fan. I don't know how I feel about the Buccaneers, but so, yeah, that wasn't so bad. But, yeah, this is just one of the things that happens. It's such a strange thing because, I'm trying to come up with names that don't belong to, to real people that I know, and it's uncanny sometimes, the way that happens. I mean, in general, I don't that's not a case of like life imitating my books, but that happens too, and I know I don't like that typically.
Well, I'll pass that on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Paul.
Hello.
Wanted to congratulate you. First of all, you drove me into the dictionary in the first paragraph of Death by Dawn. I didn't know what a caltrop was.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Had to look that up. But I had a question for you. At the end of the book,
Don't give away a spoiler.
well,
Not all have read it.
you left Shadow
Yeah. No.
asleep
Yes.
in the back of the,
For 45 seconds.
yeah.
Do not fret. Actually, a lot of people have been bothered by that the way I did finish Dead by Dawn, but it's only in a way that I never could have conceived, because in my mind, again, trying to be as oblique as I can about this, Mike turned around and went right back outside. To me, it was obvious, but obviously it wasn't obvious because people keep asking me. They're worried about him.
Well, it was a wonderful ending. All right, thank you.
Sure.
Hello, Paul.
Hi.
I graduated from Colby College many years before Mike. But being up in that part of Maine, and then through the 4 years I was there, traveling to a lot of different spots in Maine, in one situation, the most memorable, was that I was a member of a fraternity band, rock band, and we used to spend all of our vacations playing in Carabasset Valley
At the Red Stallion.
at the Red Stallion. As a matter of fact, we were the opening act for Judd Strunk, which is some real old Maine lore.
Yes, it is.
If you've been there. I love the way that you get us into different regions and towns in Maine, because I can remember a lot of them, but you also disguise some of your locales with fictitious names. My question is, where are the headwaters of the Dead River?
Well, the Dead River branches. It starts. One branch starts in the chain of ponds, which is near Coburn Gore, which is sort of the last town before you cross over into Canada,
Right.
in the direction of what's over there, Sherbrooke, I think. And then the Deadwater also sort of parallels. It kind of heads over towards the Rangeley area.
Okay.
But it begins there, and then it used to run unimpeded all the way to the Kennebec before they built a dam, which created Flagstaff Lake.
Okay.
So yeah, I mean, one of the joys for me of the series is getting to explore different parts of Maine. I feel a responsibility to show readers that there's not one Maine. We used to have a joke at Down East, for obvious reasons, about lobsters and lighthouses. And there are so many subcultures in Maine that I've tried to bring alive. I try to set the books in different kind of locations. This Seabird Island thing Kristen and I were lucky enough to go on with Steve Kress onto Eastern Egg Rock. This is the island where he reintroduced Atlantic puffins to the United States. He went up to Newfoundland, I think, Kristen, yeah, kidnapped a bunch of puffin eggs or puffin nestlings and brought them to Maine, and through trial and error got them to eat and eventually breed. They went away, they came back, they had broods. It's an amazing thing what they did, and it's an amazing place to go. And of course my imagination was, well, this is just the perfect spot for a murder.
Hooray, find some more.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I love the Mike Bowditch series, like so many people in the Valley do. I'm a librarian in North Conway, and people, of course, ask, what else can we read? And many times, if they love, well, we point them to your books if we still have to. Most of them know them already. But then we recommend C.J. Box and William Ken Kruger, for instance. And you do get compared to C.J. Box a lot. How do you feel about that? Do you see where do you see the similarities? Where do you think you are different?
So C.J. Box writes a series of novels, very successful series of novels, the first of which happened to come out while I was writing The Poacher's Son and spoiled my belief that I was onto something new writing a game word mystery. But actually, Chuck Box and I are represented by the same agent. We're friendly. At one point, he invited me down to Mexico to go saltwater fly fishing with him. I could not accept. I think it's a good thing. I feel like there are more differences than similarities personally. But he's been very generous, sending readers my way, and I do think that there are lots of qualities of his books that resonate with fans of mine. Another writer who was actually very influential on my series early on is a guy named Steve Hamilton, who writes. He has a few different books series, but Alex Mcknight, his books are set in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and Mcknight is a private investigator, so you don't get the nature stuff as much, but the vibe is similar, I think, and he's a wonderful writer. So he's somebody else I would recommend.
Hi.
Hello.
It's nice to meet you, Paul.
Nice to meet you.
I've read all of your books, the whole series.
Thank you.
They're very adventurous. Our book club met a couple of days ago, and we were commenting on how Mike went through what he went through in his ordeal with the river and then with the snowmobile afterwards. And it was almost, how did he survive that? Mm-hmm. Are there any wardens that you've met that have gone through anything anywhere near that?
No, but so I had read a survival novel before I had the idea for Dead by Dawn, and it bothered me. And the reason it bothered me was I didn't think it was a very good survival novel. It was very well written, but I didn't feel like it illustrated some of the things that I had learned about how people in extreme situations actually survive. And some of that came from having read a while ago a book, oh God, now I'm going to blank on the name. It's in the acknowledgments of my book, and it's about survival, like the qualities. It's a nonfiction book, and for instance, one of the things that this guy identifies from having studied all of these survival cases is humor. That people who are managed to find humor in their desperate situation seem to be more likely to survive. But when you read a lot of these nonfiction accounts of survival, Steve Callahan, who is a sailor who was sailing across the Atlantic and his boat sank, somewhere off the Canary Islands, I guess, the Azores or something. And he basically spent 2.5 months at sea in a little boat, drinking rainwater, fishing when he could, and laughing at his plight. And I think if you read that in fiction, you say, well, there's no way this guy could have survived. Mm-hmm. But, I said, it's interesting. I mean, when you read real stories of survival, if you've seen that movie, The Revenant, with Leonardo DiCaprio, the real story is astonishing what this guy survived. He's basically clawed to death by a bear, buried, but he's not really dead. So he manages to get out of the ground and then journey 1,000 miles or something to where he's along the way he's hunted by Native Americans and all this stuff, and you say, this can't be true, but it was true. So, I don't really mind if people say he couldn't have done this, because I feel like he did it. I said he did it.
And one other point came up too about, was there an internal investigation? I don't remember in this book that there was after this incident, because don't they usually conduct internal investigations?
Oh, on police use of force? Yeah, there would have been. Yeah. I mean, it's the famous, I guess it's Hitchcock, who said basically drama is life with all the boring parts cut out. And that's the thing, is that, there's not a single book that I've written that shouldn't rightly include about 150 pages of bureaucratic stuff that Mike has to deal with as a result of the story. And you just have to sort of
fill in the blank.
Yeah, you got to fill in the blanks. Yeah. Nobody wants to read that. So
great, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hello.
I want to thank you for bringing me back to a wonderful time in my life when I first got married. I went from the north of Boston to Errol, New Hampshire.
Yeah, well.
Back in 1964, when they had crank phones. And your book just brought so many wonderful memories back, because we had a couple of very good friends who were game wardens who lived in the area. But my question is, you mentioned that you did not read the book the way the audio person did. And I was just curious, because I love audio as well as, reading. But I wondered what the difference might be.
Well, I think a lot of times it's inflection. I don't, usually what I provide to him now, it was a little bit rockier at the beginning in the earlier books, but now I give him a pronunciation guide. And that's pretty much it. He occasionally will send me a question about something or other, but he's an actor. That's his job, and I welcome his interpretation. It's really just to say it's not my interpretation, and they never offered me the opportunity to narrate the books, and I am eternally grateful for that, because I can't imagine what I would do with some of the accents and voices, and I don't have that in me.
I know it's a real talent.
It is a real talent, yeah.
And I think the reader of a book makes a big difference.
Absolutely. I've been turned off of series. I won't name them.
No. I think that was my only comment. But
thank you.
But I appreciate the wonderful work, and I plan to do a lot more reading.
Oh, good.
Yes, a lot more. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have two questions that have come in through the online folks.
Okay.
The first one's from Cheryl and Rudy. How did you pick the name Pentacook for one of the town names in Dead by Dawn? Does it refer to the Penacook Indian tribe that lived along the Merrimack River in New Hampshire?
I did. That's a great place where, so Pentacook is the name for a fictional mill town on the Androscoggin, somewhere between Rumford and Jay. The Pentacooks were in that area. And, of course, the Wabanaki moved around a lot. So you see some of these names pop up in different places, and of course you have sort of tribes and sub-tribes, and there's the Pigwackets, and I think Molly Molasses was it not Molly Molasses? I can't remember. There were, there's famous stories about these, each of the various tribes and nations, and that's something I'd like to write more about, but I don't feel like I have a standing to really, to write from a Native American point of view, or even I have to be very respectful in my characters who are, and I have several. I have one who's a Penobscot, and or several who are Penobscot, and then one who's a Passamaquoddy, and so I think it's important. I like to acknowledge, their sort of the memory of the land, has towards the people who were here before the settlers.
Thank you. There's one other question from Judd V, and they asked, what's your writing process? Do you plan the whole story out, or does it evolve as you go?
So I am not somebody who sits down and writes out an outline. It just doesn't seem to be me. I've had to do it on occasion. Typically, when I have to do it when I've needed to prove that I deserve another book contract. Sometimes they want to know, well, okay, that's all well and fine, but tell us what you're going to write. I'm sort of past that point now, thankfully, in my career. Some writers, that's the way that they work. James Elroy, who wrote, LA Confidential and lots of other books, he's said that he writes an outline that's about 75 pages long. So he just, it's basically, he has the book done when he has the outline done almost. My philosophy is I sort of start with some general ideas about the story, the setting, the time of year, because a warden's life changes from month to month. I know what the crime is. I think I know who did it. But largely, I let myself, I just go in the first draft. And the reason I like to write that way is, I don't typically go back and revise midway. I just keep on going, because I think that instills a sort of more suspense and forward momentum in the book if I'm just going. I also find that when I write, I am very frequently surprised by things that happen in the story. A good example of this, if you've read my book Trespasser, Mike, early in that book, is called to a deer car crash. And there's a state trooper who ends up showing up at the scene. And in my original conception, the state trooper's role was to say to Mike, I got this, you go home. And that was the last we were going to see the state trooper. But as I was writing the scene, the state trooper became more and more of a jerk. It was like he just kept sort of, I don't know where this was coming from, but he just wouldn't let it go with Mike. And before I knew it, he became a major character in that story, and I hadn't planned it. So, as I say often, my belief is that if I'm surprised, you will be surprised when you're reading it. And, the important thing is that it all hangs together after multiple drafts and revisions and the proofing process. I mean, that's key.
I did two more, it looks like. Someone had a comment. Elizabeth was hoping that you would tell the audiobook narrator how to pronounce Augusta.
Yeah. I told you I gave a pronunciation guide. It didn't include ones that I thought were. There is. Granted, it's a very little known golf tournament that occurs. I think it's in the spring. Nobody ever talks about it. It's not like, but I think it's set in a place that, isn't that the name of the town that you hear about for half the year from Jim Nance? It's Augusta. As I say, he's a wonderful narrator, and it's not fair. I make my share of mistakes in the books, so no stones being thrown by me.
So Arthur asks, do you still do any guiding in Maine? If so, what kind of guiding?
Well, the funny thing is so I got my guide's license about 4 months before The Poacher's Son was accepted for publication. So guiding was going to be my fallback if writing didn't work out. Needless to say, I don't do any guiding. I have a lot of good friends who are professional guides who are wonderful at their jobs. And basically, it's a hospitality job. You're taking care of people, you're cooking for them, you're untangling their lines, you're tying their knots, you're hooking a fish and handing the rod to them. You're keeping a very positive attitude. Kristen does some bird guiding, and it's the same sort of thing. It's like some mornings, if you're birding, there's nothing. And we have a friend who's a bird guide, and he's like, now stop here a minute and look at that starling. Look how it's the sheen of its feathers. And it sounds totally bogus, right? But look at a starling. They really, if you really look at them. Yeah. I'm the fiction writer. I'm taking some liberties here. It's just, I don't have it in me to be. I'm not that patient to be a guide.
So there's one more question.
Okay.
I think we'll wrap up with this one. Is there anyone in particular who was your inspiration for Mike Bowditch?
Mike, of course, obviously there are a lot of people who just sort of assume that I'm Mike. And I get emails that say, "Dear Mike." Of course, there are elements of who I was when I was in my 20s in him. I always say Mike was more headstrong than I was. I say he's more intelligent than I am. But I'm a better fisherman than he is. No, there's no one person that inspired him. I sort of have just let him come to me, and hopefully he feels real.
I'm so glad you do that. Thank you. And I guess we're done. We're going to thank you.
Thank you, everybody, and to everybody online. And so, as I said at the outset, I will go off into the cafe, and if you do have books that you want to have signed, I'll put my mask on and can sign some books. The one I won't sign for you is this one, which I'm going to give to my wife. She's small. Do not try to overpower her. She's feisty. Thank you, everybody.